Before I begin, I'd like to just share something with you. This conference is called States of Mystical Consciousness and Everything. And this morning, I was just sitting by myself out on that wonderful terrace, watching the sun rise up over the mountain. And it's almost as if I had a kind of out of the body experience. It was like you could watch the prana from the sun just sweeping across the mountain. So I share that with you because this is a very, very special place indeed. So we're going to look this afternoon at ideas surrounding mind and what it is. And despite all the breakthroughs in such things as quantum physics, uh, the provable existence of things like psi phenomena, telepathy, clairvoyance, etc., and many millennia of spiritual insights, the bulk of modern science remains firmly rooted in an exclusively materialistic worldview, which says only the physical world exists. And this new religion of scientism denies the existence of such things as soul or spirit, as well as the existence of subtle, non-physical realms of being. It denies the survival of consciousness after death, and it denies the fact that there's any real purpose to the universe. So science can't even define what consciousness is. And this is a problem. Science can only describe it as being a byproduct of various things that go on in our brains. But the esoteric view of consciousness is far more wide-ranging. It's far more comprehensive because it locates the mind far beyond contents of our skulls. So consciousness is perhaps the buzzword in modern science. And every year there are numerous books and articles and thousands of research papers and conferences which are held on this subject. And they all purport to explore this idea of consciousness. And yet we still can't say exactly what it is. The definitions which do exist in science are, in my opinion, woefully inadequate and sometimes downright ludicrous, I have to say, because consciousness is defined solely in terms of physical phenomena, the electrochemical activity in the brain and nothing more. So for science, we have to say, consciousness remains the dark side of the moon. Now, conventional science describes consciousness purely as an epiphenomenon or a byproduct of all this electrochemical activity going on in our brains. And the scientists say that without a brain, there can be no consciousness or mental activity. And yet, the observations of sages and mystics down the ages um, contradict this because they have seen far beyond the physical realms, and this is very important. Um, and some scientific observation is also now beginning to indicate that this may be the case, that there may be something more to consciousness than just activity in the brain. Now, quite interestingly, many cultures down the ages don't locate the mind in the head at all. Some indigenous people, if you ask them where the mind is, they point here to the heart. And this is, I think, very significant. And they regard the idea of the mind being locked just inside the head as a somewhat ludicrous notion. And scientific research at places like the Heart Math Institute Research Center in the United States has shown that the heart just like the brain, is indeed seat of consciousness. And significantly, I think the electromagnetic energies generated by the heart are 1,000 times stronger than those produced by the brain. And science has also established that the human intestines are also an important seat of consciousness. This gut-based enteric nervous system consists of two thin layers of 100 million nerve cells lining the gastrointestinal tract. Now, although gaining in popularity slowly, gradually, these ideas still remain somewhat peripheral and fringe and possibly slightly weird, especially to conventional scientists. So let's have a look at exactly what orthodox science says about this, and then contrast that with how occult science sees these things. And the differences, I think, we'll find are quite remarkable. Really think that I'm not against science in any way, although I am increasingly suspicious about some of its dubious technologies, especially when they're used to harm people, to spy on us, and to control people. And I'm deeply concerned about our increasing reliance on science and technology. I'm very concerned about this because I think that many people have become addicted to it, just the way that people get addicted to other things. We'll explain more about this in a moment. Science during our lifetimes has achieved great things and it's brought enormous benefits to mankind. We can look into the furthest depth of the universe and examine stars and planets billions of light years away. We can also see the tiniest fragments of matter at work. And thanks to improved medical science, people live longer than they used to, and they can often survive catastrophic injuries. We can travel across the world in a few hours, and we can communicate with more or less anyone almost instantly. And these are huge benefits. And without scientific techniques in every field of human endeavor, especially agriculture, this planet simply wouldn't be able to support the 8 billion plus people who currently inhabit it. Science is also opening up interplanetary travel. It's creating exotic new materials, and it's developing other technologies which may also assist us too. But it's also exploring deeply sinister means of augmenting humans with machine parts or creating robotic transhuman entities, which we are told may possibly replace us one day. So this is something to be really worried about, I think. And for better or worse, science has really shaped our modern world more than anything else. In the past, when we look at the past, it took decades or centuries for technologies to change. Now it happens almost on a daily basis. Just look at how quickly artificial intelligence is developing. It's literally developing on an hourly basis, this stuff. And well, I find it somewhat worrying, but I think it can also bring great benefits. So it's not the technologies themselves which are a problem, it's how we decide to deploy them. So science really dominates our lives and it offers technologies we believe are vital to our well-being and indeed our very existence. And we've come to worship science as some kind of savior. But science has also brought as many problems as it's created solutions. Its products are very habit-inducing and sometimes very damaging. And the mindset all this creates has a hugely limiting and constricting effect on human development. So generations of machine-dependent humanity are now coming into existence. Interestingly, just a few days ago, the Australian government have been talking about banning social media from under 16s. And I think this is a very, very good idea because clearly a lot of young people are becoming heavily addicted and dependent on these technologies, which, I mean, you would think a communications technology would innately be a good thing, but it isn't because it leads to bullying, it leads to all sorts of other unsavory behavior. And members of what are referred to as Generation Z or Generation Z for our American visitors, i.e., those born after 1996, have grown up fully immersed in this new digital age. And often they experience iPads and smartphones, as soon as they're able to walk, literally. You often see, babies in prams doing things with mobile phones, and I think this is extremely worrying. So it's an irony, isn't it, that these things which are meant to assist communication actually have the opposite effect and have started to alienate people in many ways. And there's abundant evidence that those people in their 20s are becoming increasingly incapable of doing what human beings do best, which is to have conversations with each other and interact physically. Um, and I think another problem with people not being able to talk to each other other than via machines is that it's locking people up in their own kind of prisons as well. It's actually alienating people from each other. Now, modern science, which is dominated by evolutionary biological theory, neurophysiology, and of course, those lingering Cartesian principles, and of course, money, offers endless discursive theories about everything, but little in the way of persuasive explanations. It strikes me that it's all quantitative. It's all about collecting oceans of data and weighing and measuring things rather than qualitative deductions or looking at the deeper value or meaning of something. I think that science could learn a great deal about both consciousness and about the universe itself by consulting and considering some of those very ancient tenets from the ageless wisdom tradition, from the perennial philosophy. However, it prefers to believe that anything which originates in the deep past is somehow innately flawed and it should be junked because it doesn't mesh with the modern mindset. And it feels like the intrusion of an ancient ancestor. And this is, in my opinion, scientific arrogance at its most pronounced. Since its emergence from older traditions 4 or 5 centuries ago, modern science has become progressively more materialistic, leaving it trapped in the cul-de-sac of its own creation. One time, science and mysticism enjoyed a fairly happy marriage. Now they're divorced. Materialistic science has now mushroomed into its own religion, which is referred to as scientism. And this largely dominates much of modern thought. Once upon a time, it was the Quran or the Bible or the Upanishads which molded minds, and now it's the standard model of physics. Scientism only accepts physical phenomena as being real. Any alternative view of the world is, they say, illusory, unprovable, and well, just wrong. They say, the scientists say, we're here to tell you how and not why. Let's leave all that nonsensical metaphysical speculation to the philosophers because it's got absolutely nothing to do with us. For science, therefore, everything must involve a physical process of some kind. There's no alternative operational model. And this is not only a massive blind spot, but it's like a big meter-thick steel door which you can't penetrate. Because as all of us in this room know, and many other people in the world, not everything is physical. So the materialistic model of the mind can only ever be kind of merry-go-round of theory and speculation until scientists accept that there are these non-physical planes of existence and processes which operate beyond biology, physics, chemistry that we think we understand. And this goes against the prevailing convictions of science. Anyone daring to step into this unknown land is taking a big risk with their reputations and their careers because there may be things which we don't understand and unthinkable new ideas which science is always reluctant to accept. Now, the Western mindset, centered as it is on individualism, is convinced that ideas originate in the minds, in the brains of individuals. It believes that they're cooked up and created independently and in isolation from everything else, as if they are always original discoveries. But the Eastern perspective takes an entirely opposite view of this. It asserts that ideas aren't original inventions at all, but are somehow retrieved from a greater storehouse of knowledge or consciousness located beyond the mind or brain of any one person. This is a universal consciousness. It's the Akashic records, essentially. So Western materialism demands ownership of these supposedly original ideas. And this, of course, has to be accompanied by the appropriate reputational or financial rewards. Eastern thought regards ideas as common property, which are potentially available to all. Now, many writers, scientists, musicians, artists, and other questioning and creative people have no idea where their ideas actually come from, where they originate. They often appear spontaneously in flashes of inspiration, insights, and sometimes they come to us in the form of dreams. A well-known and often quoted example of this is the German chemist August Kekulé, who was finally able to identify the structure of the benzene molecule back in 1865. The insight that it consisted of a hexagon of carbon atoms surrounded by a ring of hydrogen atoms came to him not directly through scientific observation, but during a daydream. In this vision, he saw a snake biting its own tail, the Ouroboros, the symbol for eternity and continuity. And this led him to identify benzene's molecular structure. So scientific discoveries aren't all about hard logic or left-brained research, repeatability or data harvesting. From time to time, a very different kind of consciousness intervenes. Sometimes scientists make discoveries by continued close focus and deep concentration on a particular problem, sometimes over a period of hours or days or even weeks. And this was how the famous English scientist Sir Isaac Newton made his discoveries, using what he described as the offspring of silence and unbroken meditation. Newton, of course, was first and foremost an alchemist before becoming a mathematician and an important proto-scientist. There was also a meditative, if not a mystical streak about the nature of Albert Einstein's endeavors, especially in his work on light and on relativity theory. Throughout his life, he immersed himself in numerous things that he called thought experiments. And effectively, he went into some kind of contemplative or meditative state. And he wrote, "The state of feeling which makes one capable of such achievements is akin to that of the religious worshipper or of one who is in love." Nikola Tesla, the pioneering and still very misunderstood Serbian-American scientist, one of the most prolific inventors of the 20th century, had his own very mysterious and intuitive methods of discovery. And he wrote significantly, "The day that science begins to understand and study non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in one decade than in all the previous centuries of its existence." But 80 years after his death, this has yet to occur to any great extent. When you look at it more closely, when you look at everything more closely, it would seem that in some or all of these insights by scientists, that it's the wisdom intuition faculty of the higher self which is at work here. Now, we know this as the sixth principle of theosophy, which we call Buddhi. And one day in the far future, this wisdom intuition principle will become our permanent sixth sense, along with sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. Not anytime soon, but it will eventually. This wisdom intuition principle is very interesting because it's mainly latent or dormant in a great many people, still waiting to be awakened from a deep sleep. Often wisdom intuition, in its early stages of development, might manifest as crude gut instincts that we have, overwhelming certainties that you know something, and occasionally as premonitions of some kind, and sometimes in its basic form as a sense of conscience. However, these days, increasing numbers of people seem to be able to access this faculty to a greater or lesser extent. More people, I think, are having this capacity. And some children being born today show far greater capacities for this than their peers, their parents, or their grandparents. Over the past century or so, there has been offered abundant proof of non-physical realms by scientific researchers themselves, but science has chosen to ignore it, or even worse, to deride, defame, and derail such assertions. Research into psi phenomena, or parapsychology, has been going on in academic circles since the 1930s, when J.B. Ryan began his pioneering work in the United States. There have been numerous studies into these, what are known as noetic sciences, sciences of the mind, clairvoyance and clairaudience, precognition or seeing the future, telekinesis or moving objects by mind power, and perhaps most importantly of all, telepathy or direct mind-to-mind non-verbal contact. Experiments in parapsychology have been conducted in many countries over many decades, often with absolutely overwhelming statistical proof that these phenomena do exist. But despite the evidence, mainstream science continues to either ignore or ridicule many of these findings because they're at such variance with the physical, mechanical view of reality that's been created and which science absolutely refuses to relinquish. The Institute of Noetic Sciences, a very interesting organization in America, has been a trailblazer in modern parapsychological research, amongst other things. Interestingly, this institute was co-founded by the astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who in 1971 spent 9 hours on the surface of the moon. And on his way back to Earth, he had a deeply, deeply mystical experience in which he felt completely swallowed up and a part of the cosmos, and it completely changed his world view. The Institute of Noetic Sciences chief scientist, a man called Dr. Dean Radin, a very interesting man, he undertook a detailed meta-analysis of thousands of these parapsychological experiments and studies undertaken over many decades in many different countries. And this overwhelmingly concluded that there was overwhelming evidence that human beings do possess such psi faculties. But even this very detailed analysis, with its overwhelming statistical proof, failed to convince the majority of those in scientific circles, who still regard all this stuff as a kind of voodoo. And it begs the question as what it would actually take to convince these scientists that this sort of stuff and mind-based phenomena actually do exist. And the answer is probably not very much, because people's minds are very hardened to new ideas. And some of them probably will still be regarding it as mumbo jumbo in their next incarnations too. But before we explore the esoteric nature of mind, let's repeat that in materialistic science's way of thinking, it's form, the brain, which produces consciousness. The brain is both its source and its repository. Without these 1,500 cubic centimeters of grey matter, science insists that there can be no consciousness. So this persistent blindness is deeply pernicious and worrying, because it's holding back humanity from experiencing the true and full nature of what reality is in all its myriad and mainly non-physical forms. And this myopia is stopping them from understanding who they and we really are, that our physical form is only a very small part of our ultimate identity. Now, with its far more panoramic perspective, occult science takes a completely opposite view. It asserts that it's consciousness that produces form. Consciousness produces form, not the other way around. In other words, consciousness precedes everything. The perceivable universe and everything in it is simply consciousness stepped down to the material plane. We say that everything is conscious in theosophy. This is one of the fundamental beliefs that we have. So everything, even down to subatomic particles, has a consciousness at its own level. Even those things which are described foolishly by materialistic science as non-organic. Now, despite its apparently panoramic body of knowledge and deep-set certainty, science remains deeply puzzled, not only by consciousness, but also by the fact that it can't actually see around 95% of all the stuff that's meant to be in the cosmos. So the remaining 95% of invisible matter is given names such as dark matter or dark energy. And adding such labels doesn't really widen our understanding of these things. It just really illustrates our ignorance. Could it be that these states, this dark matter and this dark energy could correspond to the etheric and astral realms that we speak of so frequently in theosophy? Importantly, I think occult science incorporates those timeless truths, universal principles, and cosmic laws known by wise beings, initiates, and sages throughout all eras, and in a time scale so vast it completely confounds all mainstream accounts of human history. These eternal truths, we are told, have been rigorously and repeatedly tested by wise seers throughout humanity's long existence. They've also been widely, but not completely, disregarded by science and dismissed as quaint folklore or myths or primitive superstition. Drawing on many different spiritual traditions, these ideas are replete with often highly subtle differentiations of what both higher and lower consciousness entails. There are said to be more scientists alive now and working on Earth than in the whole of recorded human history, and I've no reason to doubt this. For these many millions of scientists, the world is just one big test tube, and money rules science more than truth does. Occult science, however, is far more arcane. Uh, it's more subtle and it's more specialized. But occult science doesn't have that many adherents. For every occult scientist, there are probably many thousands of mainstream materialistic scientists. Occult science's ideas remain as true and as fresh as they've always been, far into the future, when the so-called laws and theories propounded in the 21st century will all have been superseded and swept away by the tides of time and the frontiers of knowledge. Occult science's timeless truths are gradually being resurrected, but I think it will be some time before they dominate and take center stage. Maybe they never will. Nevertheless, an appreciation is beginning to dawn that the entire cosmos consists of nothing but consciousness, and therefore life. Life is consciousness. These life forces are differentiated, they're connected, and crucially, they're also evolving through vast cycles of time. One day, the scientific view that only the physical fabric of the universe exists will be as laughable as it will be irrelevant. Over the past 150 years, the modern theosophical movement has played a crucial but often understated role in redefining what consciousness actually is. Let's not forget that next year the Theosophical Society celebrates its 150th anniversary. During the first 3, 4, 5 decades of its existence, the Theosophical Society then did attract top-ranked scientists, influential thinkers, and people from many different walks of life and many different professions. But things have changed. You know, in the old days, it used to attract people like Sir William Crookes, the famous English scientist, and Thomas Edison, the inventor. Albert Einstein was interested in the works of Madame Blavatsky, and more recently, the the physicist David Bohm. But for reasons which I think aren't entirely clear and which are probably highly debatable, from the 1930s onwards, the society no longer seemed to attract anything like the same caliber of people, certainly from the scientific community, as it did in its early days. But despite all this, it managed to infiltrate radical new concepts of consciousness and the wider non-physical realms in which that consciousness exists into the wider world. This is a very mysterious process, and it's been a mighty achievement. Since most people have never heard of theosophy, or the towering figures involved in its formation, such as Helena Blavatsky. If you walk down the street of any major city and said to people, "Have you heard of Madame Blavatsky?" Very few people would actually have heard of her. And yet she was arguably the most influential woman of the 19th century. If the mission of the Theosophical Society was to reintroduce these new ideas, new but very ancient ideas, back into the West to counteract materialistic science and soured religions, then it's been highly successful. And I have to say, it's been more of a behind the scenes guerrilla style operation than a mass assault, because the Theosophical Society has never been about standing on a soapbox and evangelizing these ideas. It's been a much more subtle process. Nevertheless, these important ideas have filtered out not only into the wider world, but also into popular consciousness. And you can see this in many different fields of human endeavor. It's no coincidence, I think, that Madame Blavatsky was described as the godmother of the New Age. Nevertheless, theosophical explanations of the ubiquity of consciousness and connectivity have become the bedrock of much modern thought, especially in these New Age and wider emerging spiritual circles. These ideas also underpin the modern environmental movement, because theosophy teaches that everything is interdependent, interconnected, and conscious. You know, if you pull up trees in the Amazon, then something else will happen as a result of that. Now, I'm not alone in regretting the fact that theosophy hasn't developed, maintained, and sustained a closer working relationship with science as it's developed over the past century. I believe that although opportunities for joint research and cooperation may have been missed in the past, I think this can be rectified. And there's a growing body of scientists who are dissatisfied with the current blunt-edged explanations. And I believe that these are the relationships which we should be forming now as theosophy. While the Theosophical Society has focused on its first object of brotherhood and the second of studying comparative religions, I wonder whether as much attention has been given to that third object of studying the hidden laws of nature and the powers latent in man. So, who better to link up with to explore these ideas than the scientists? The sympathetic and open-minded ones, of course. At this present time, contemporary science and its occult counterpart are at loggerheads, like two opposing armies lined up on the battlefield. But I think the tide is slowly beginning to turn. Modern science is our best ally. We've all heard this particular phrase, this sentence written by the master Kuthumi late in the 19th century. And will this bold statement eventually prove to be true, I wonder? I certainly hope so. But it certainly won't until science expands its own consciousness beyond the dim, narrow back alleys of materialism, and it moves itself towards broader horizons. And that requires nothing less than a scientific revolution. And scientific revolutions are rare and sporadic because science likes to create its own certainties and then hide behind them for as long as it can. And given that many scientists have yet to get to grips with the momentous implications of quantum mechanics, which is now a century or so old, it would be a very brave soul indeed who predicted that scientists may suddenly reevaluate their long-held paradigms and their laws and their assorted theories. Ideas of quantum entanglement and non-locality, where two distant particles remain invisibly connected, spooky action at a distance, as Einstein called it, still baffle many members of the scientific community. But this idea can be clearly explained by occult science. Quantum physics also explores what's known as the observer effect, how an individual's mind or consciousness influences the outcome of a particular interaction or experiment. I think theosophy and quantum physics are actually made for each other, but not everyone realizes this yet. Pioneers, especially in the realms of science, have always faced deep hostility from the establishment, particularly from the religious authorities. Look at the reception that Paracelsus, Giordano Bruno, Galileo, and a long, long list of lesser-known figures received for their groundbreaking assertions. And in the modern era, it's no different. Scientists opposing the mainstream view, like the English biologist Rupert Sheldrake, face ongoing ridicule and the rigors of cancel culture by suggesting, for example, there might be an invisible connective infrastructure operating in the world, which he calls morphogenetic fields. Not so long ago, the editor of the highly respected and prestigious British science journal Nature openly called for Sheldrake's books to be burned. And this obviously evoked memories of such awful spectacles which took place in Nazi Germany. And that's scientific myopia, or should we say dystopia, in action for you. Anyway, rather than perishing in the flames, Rupert Sheldrake's books have done very nicely, thank you, and his influence on science is increasing all the time. There are, of course, many other examples of visionaries being silenced by the narrow-minded majority, deep in the past and also right now. Rejection of the new is one of those regular leitmotifs threading its way through history. People don't like new ideas. Keeping new ideas under wraps is always necessary to preserve some self-satisfied status quo. Keeping the mind locked in the brain is their top priority. So, to conclude, the great debate about consciousness will no doubt rage on and on and on for many decades. But one day humanity will look back with a kind of sniggering scorn at a time when the dominant belief was that humanity's whole intellectual capacity originated from chemicals and from energies swirling around inside the head. As always, they'll shake their own heads and inwardly ask the question, how could we ever believe such nonsense? Thank you.